They all thought my life was ordinary. My neighbors, my family, even my own son believed Eleanor Whitford, at 63, was just another retired schoolteacher enjoying quiet days. But they had no idea what I had hidden for decades, $20 million tucked away in assets no one knew existed. It all began the day my distant uncle passed, leaving me an unexpected inheritance of $10 million. My son, Thomas, barely blinked before insisting, "Mom, $10 million is plenty. You don't need more." Little did he know, his own idea of wealth was about to be dwarfed by the secret I'd cultivated over years. Investments, properties, and silent accounts that had quietly multiplied without anyone's knowledge. At first, the attention felt exhilarating. Old friends called more often. Distant cousins suddenly appeared in my life, and Thomas's friends treated me like a queen. But soon, the thrill twisted into unease. People's smiles carried agendas. Praise felt like probing. Every conversation became a test, every gathering a subtle negotiation. I had to navigate their newfound interest while protecting both my fortune and my sense of self. I could see the disbelief in Thomas's eyes when I revealed the truth about the other $20 million. The look wasn't just surprise, it was recalculation, like the foundation of his world had shifted. Suddenly, the dynamic between us changed. He wasn't just my son, he was someone grappling with his own assumptions about life, money, and trust. If you're watching this, subscribe and comment where you're from. Let me take you back to how a simple inheritance became a journey of revelation, strategy, and unexpected lessons. From a quiet life in suburban Connecticut to the complicated realities of sudden wealth. This story isn't about the money. It's about understanding its power, the fragility of trust, and the strength of the secrets we carry. Long before my secret fortune became the center of attention, I was Eleanor Whitford, a retired schoolteacher living a quiet life in suburban Connecticut. Days were gentle, predictable, and comforting, filled with morning walks, book clubs, and tending to the small garden I loved. At 63, I had settled into a rhythm, a life measured not by wealth, but by the small joys of ordinary existence, teaching generations of children, nurturing friendships that spanned decades, and quietly managing the modest nest egg I had saved. My distant uncle's passing changed everything. Unexpectedly, I inherited $10 million, a sum that made my neighbors gawk and my relatives suddenly appear more interested in my well-being than ever before. Thomas, my 35-year-old son, didn't hide his excitement, but his reaction carried a mix of disbelief and overconfidence. "Mom, $10 million is more than enough. You don't need anything else," he said. Little did he know that I had quietly built a hidden empire over the years. Investments, properties, and accounts that no one, not even Thomas, had known about. The $20 million I had carefully cultivated was my silent power, a private victory in a life that had always emphasized prudence and foresight. The inheritance forced me to confront realities I had long avoided. People began treating me differently. Old friends seemed distant yet curious. Family members grew calculating, and acquaintances' smiles carried agendas. Every interaction became a test of loyalty and intentions. Even Thomas, who had always been my closest ally, wrestled with new expectations, jealousy, and the subtle shift in our relationship dynamic. His assumptions about money and life had never accounted for the patience, discipline, and strategy required to quietly grow wealth over decades. Through it all, I learned lessons that no classroom could teach. Wealth wasn't just about the numbers. It was about trust, power, and perception. I discovered how easily relationships could strain under the weight of money, and how important it was to protect not only my fortune, but my sense of self. Every phone call, visit, and conversation carried new implications. I had to learn to read people the way I once read students, attentively, with discernment, and without judgment. By the time I decided to reveal my $20 million secret to Thomas, I had a deep understanding of human nature, the fragility of relationships, and the responsibilities that come with unexpected wealth. The quiet life I had cherished had been irrevocably changed, and yet I realized that this transformation wasn't just about money. It was about insight, resilience, and the strategic patience that allowed a retired teacher to become unexpectedly powerful, respected, and even feared in subtle ways. It all started with a simple phone call from my lawyer. "Eleanor, your uncle's will has been executed. You've inherited $10 million. My hand shook as I hung up, the number floating in my mind like a surreal dream. $10 million. Suddenly, my quiet life of routine and modest comfort was transformed into something entirely new. Thomas, my son, was ecstatic. "Mom, $10 million is more than enough. You don't need to work, worry, or plan anymore, he said, grinning like a child unwrapping the most exciting gift of their life. I smiled, but inside I knew he didn't understand. He had always measured wealth in immediate pleasure and surface-level status, never in the patient, strategic accumulation I had managed in silence. For decades, I had quietly built a separate financial foundation. Investments in real estate, diversified portfolios, and trust accounts had multiplied beyond expectation. That $20 million wasn't flashy or public. It was invisible to the world, a secret only I had nurtured. The inheritance wasn't just an infusion of cash. It was the spark that would reveal the magnitude of my hidden strategy. Almost immediately, the world began to shift. Friends called more often, distant relatives showed up with thinly veiled agendas, and even neighbor smiles seemed to carry questions rather than warmth. Thomas, too, started to behave differently, caught between admiration, jealousy, and confusion. The dynamics we had always shared were changing, and I realized that this sudden shift in perception, sparked by money, would test not only my relationships, but my ability to navigate the new reality with caution and insight. I decided it was time to reveal a fraction of my secret. When Thomas learned about the $20 million I had quietly amassed over decades, the disbelief in his eyes was profound. It wasn't just the money, it was the revelation that his assumptions about life, success, and trust were incomplete. Suddenly, he had to reassess his understanding of me, and I had to prepare for the way our lives and our relationship would inevitably change. That phone call wasn't just the moment I inherited wealth. It was the trigger that set in motion a journey of revelation, strategy, and the subtle lessons of power, patience, and trust that I'd spent a lifetime perfecting. The days following the inheritance were like walking through a hall of mirrors. Everything familiar reflected back to me with distortion, reshaped by money. Friends I had known for decades suddenly became distant, only calling when I was presentable in a way that showcased wealth. Relatives who had been out of touch reappeared with smiles that felt too rehearsed, their questions probing, their intentions hidden. Even Thomas, my own son, became a different person in subtle ways, hesitant around me, calculating, sometimes resentful. At first, I tried to embrace the changes with grace, attending family dinners and social gatherings, showing a polite smile and responding with patience. But the excitement of attention quickly curdled into anxiety. Every compliment felt like a test. Every gesture of kindness felt transactional. I had to remind myself constantly. Money revealed character, it didn't create it. Thomas struggled the most. He had always seen life in immediate terms. What can I buy? Who can I impress? How can I benefit? Now, confronted with my $20 million secret, he didn't know how to process it. He oscillated between awe and suspicion, admiration and subtle jealousy. One evening, he asked quietly, "Mom, why didn't you tell me before?" His voice carried more than curiosity. It held doubt, mistrust, and the fear of being left behind. The tension reached a breaking point at a family gathering. Conversations shifted to finances, investments, and legacies, areas I had once navigated in solitude. Every question felt like an interrogation. Every glance felt weighted. I realized that wealth had not brought me closer to people. It had created distance. The relationships I had once taken for granted now required strategy, patience, and boundaries. I spent nights awake, reflecting on what truly mattered. Money had amplified everything: generosity, greed, love, suspicion. I had to learn to protect not just my fortune, but my peace of mind. I had to distinguish between those who loved me for me and those who loved the idea of my wealth. The emotional fall was steep but necessary. Without confronting the betrayal, the envy, and the fragile trust of those around me, I could never truly wield my inheritance wisely. By the end of the week, I made a decision. I would no longer let wealth dictate my happiness or define my relationships. Instead, I would balance it with wisdom, awareness, and intentional boundaries. This was the first step toward reclaiming control, not just of my money, but of my life, my trust, and my connection to those I truly cared for. In the weeks that followed, I began to understand that wealth, while powerful, was not the key to happiness. It was the lens through which relationships and self-worth were tested. I started setting boundaries with friends and family, learning to say no without guilt and to observe without judgment. Every interaction became a lesson in human behavior, and I realized that my $20 million secret was less about money and more about insight. Thomas and I began to navigate a new dynamic. He was cautious at first, unsure how to approach me without the interference of envy or resentment. I allowed him to express his fears and frustrations, listening without judgment, sharing just enough to help him grow rather than merely impress him. Slowly, I saw him evolve. He started understanding that wealth could be a tool, but it could also be a trap. He learned humility, patience, and the importance of integrity, lessons he had never grasped when money had not been a factor. I also explored new ways to use my inheritance. I invested in causes that mattered to me, from local education programs to women's health initiatives, and discovered that giving purpose to wealth created deeper satisfaction than hoarding it ever could. Each decision reminded me that I controlled the narrative, that I was no longer merely reacting to the world around me, but shaping it with intention. I reconnected with old friends on my own terms. I tested loyalties and observed sincerity. Some people faded away, revealing their true colors, while others stayed and strengthened the bonds we had always shared. The process was enlightening. Money could illuminate character, but it could not create it. By the end of the summer, I felt a sense of balance I hadn't experienced before. I wasn't just Eleanor Whitford, the woman with a secret fortune. I was a mother, a mentor, a philanthropist, and a strategist of my own life. The lessons I had learned about trust, resilience, and human nature were more valuable than any sum of money. Through this journey, I realized that wealth without wisdom is hollow, but wealth paired with discernment can transform not just your life, but the lives of those around you. I had turned what could have been a period of isolation, greed, and envy into a time of growth, understanding, and empowerment. My inheritance had given me more than financial freedom. It had given me clarity, perspective, and a renewed sense of purpose. By the time autumn arrived, the lessons of sudden wealth had crystallized into a new way of living. I had learned to measure relationships not by proximity or politeness, but by sincerity and respect. Thomas had grown into a more thoughtful, self-aware man, understanding that true wealth was not in numbers, but in integrity and trust. The tension between us had softened, replaced with conversations that were honest, sometimes uncomfortable, but always meaningful. I carefully curated my social circle. Some old friends who had initially flocked to me for the novelty of my fortune faded away when they realized that my boundaries were firm. Others stayed, their loyalty proven not by the amount I had inherited, but by their willingness to engage authentically without agendas. These were the people who made my life richer than any bank account ever could. I also continued to give purpose to my financial resources. Scholarships were established in my family's name. Grants were awarded to local community projects, and small business initiatives were funded to help women regain independence. Each act of giving reinforced a sense of responsibility and fulfillment that no sudden wealth could ever provide alone. I began to see my money not as a shield against life's difficulties, but as a tool for creating meaningful impact. Thomas and I occasionally laughed about his initial disbelief over my $20 million secret. But more often, we reflected on the deeper lessons we had both learned: patience, discernment, humility, and the strength of maintaining one's values, even in the face of temptation and pressure. I realized that true wealth was a combination of financial security, emotional intelligence, and the ability to navigate human complexity with grace. In the end, I found balance, not in wealth alone, but in the careful integration of fortune, wisdom, and genuine connection. I had transformed what could have been a story of mistrust and opportunism into a narrative of resilience and empowerment. My inheritance had not only changed my financial reality, but had reshaped my approach to life, relationships, and self-worth. Looking back, I understood that the true power of wealth lay in perspective. By protecting my secret, setting boundaries, and choosing where to invest not just money but attention and energy, I had discovered freedom. Freedom to live authentically, to love genuinely, and to influence the world meaningfully. Eleanor Whitford at 63 had become more than just a wealthy woman. She had become someone who had mastered the art of living fully, wisely, and generously. The moment I revealed the $20 million secret, everything shifted. Faces I thought I knew suddenly changed. Smiles became scrutinizing glances, and the casual warmth I once felt from family and friends felt like a performance. Thomas stared at me, his eyes a mix of shock, confusion, and something I hadn't expected, hesitation. Suddenly, I wasn't just his mother. I was a person holding the power to rewrite the rules of his world. At first, it was disorienting. Calls became strategic, visits felt obligatory, and every compliment seemed to carry a hidden agenda. Even neighbors who had once greeted me with cheerful small talk now looked at me as if evaluating my bank statements instead of my character. I realized that wealth didn't just change how others treated me, it magnified who they truly were, and it magnified who I needed to become. Thomas struggled the most. He had always believed that $10 million was more than enough to live comfortably, yet here I was, revealing a fortune that dwarfed that. His casual assumptions about life, priorities, and even morality had been challenged overnight. I watched him wrestle with disappointment, admiration, and a sudden sense of responsibility he wasn't prepared for. This wasn't about resentment, it was about him understanding the weight of privilege and the importance of humility. I knew I had to take control, not just of my wealth, but of the relationships surrounding it. I began setting clear boundaries. Discussions about money had limits, visits and requests were filtered through discernment, and my time was no longer negotiable. The experience was a painful reminder that trust must be earned, even when you think you know someone. Money doesn't create loyalty, it reveals the truth. Yet, it wasn't all loss. I discovered allies in unexpected places, friends whose values had never wavered, distant cousins who proved sincere, and neighbors who saw me as a person first, not a fortune second. With them, I nurtured connections that were authentic, fostering bonds that were stronger precisely because they had survived scrutiny. I also guided Thomas, teaching him lessons I had learned over decades. Wealth is a tool, not a shield. Generosity matters only when it's intentional, and character is what money cannot buy. Slowly, he began to understand that life's value isn't measured in bank accounts, but in integrity, resilience, and the courage to set boundaries when the world shifts around you. By the time the initial whirlwind settled, I had gained something far more important than money: clarity, strength, and the wisdom to navigate the complicated dance of relationships and wealth. The fallout had been painful, yes, but it had also been enlightening. I was no longer just Eleanor Whitford, the woman who quietly accumulated a secret fortune. I was Eleanor Whitford, fully aware of the power she carried and how to wield it wisely. Months passed, and the chaos of sudden wealth gradually gave way to stability. The initial shock in Thomas's eyes became understanding, and our relationship began to shift from tension to mutual respect. He wasn't just my son anymore, he was someone learning how to handle privilege responsibly, someone who could finally see the world through the lens of patience, discernment, and self-awareness. I, too, had transformed. No longer hidden behind secrecy, I had learned the delicate balance of living with wealth without letting it define me. I reinvested portions of my fortune into causes that mattered: local schools, community centers, and programs helping women over 50 start new careers. Each contribution reminded me that money is not just a measure of success, but a tool to create impact, to leave a legacy that goes beyond personal gain. Friends who had proven their loyalty were now closer than ever, and I made peace with those who had drifted away. I learned that relationships thrive not on what you can give, but on who you are when everything else fades. My days became a mix of meaningful work, time with Thomas, and quiet moments of reflection. For the first time in decades, I felt grounded, purposeful, and genuinely content. I also established clear boundaries for the future. Family and acquaintances understood that respect came before entitlement. Requests were considered, not assumed. The lessons of trust and skepticism had left me wiser, more confident, and unafraid to say no when necessary. Wealth had revealed human nature, and I had chosen to navigate it without losing myself in the process. Thomas and I worked together on financial projects that aligned with his growth. I mentored him, showing how money should support values rather than overshadow them. Slowly, I watched him mature, not just as a son, but as a man capable of compassion, responsibility, and foresight. Our bond had deepened, not despite the money, but because we had learned to wield it wisely together. By the time a year had passed, life had found a new rhythm. I wasn't defined by a hidden fortune or the attention it brought. I was defined by resilience, clarity, and the ability to embrace both wealth and authenticity simultaneously. Eleanor Whitford, at 63, had become someone who could enjoy the benefits of financial freedom while maintaining integrity, nurturing meaningful relationships, and living life on her own terms. The inheritance that once threatened to upend everything had instead become the catalyst for growth, understanding, and balance. And as I looked at Thomas, smiling with newfound respect and gratitude, I realized the true fortune was not the $30 million in my accounts. It was the wisdom, connection, and peace I had earned along the way.